Let's bring in our panel to discuss it. Joining us now, political strategist Joe Listingi. He has many a Democrat client. And right there in the center of the screen, Sarah Isgur Flores, the Deputy Communications Director of the Republican National Committee. Sarah, let's begin. Ladies first. The notion is from those who oppose photo ID, voter ID, they say it's discriminatory against minorities. How would you respond?
Well, I would just agree with the Attorney General that voting is a fundamental right, and that's why everyone's vote should count. And everyone's vote should count equally, and every legal vote should count. In this case, in Texas, the other side has yet to find a plaintiff who couldn't vote under the law. An ID is free. They've made it very easy with 6 different types of ID that you can have. And if they can't find someone who wasn't able to vote, then I think they've got a problem in showing that this has any discriminatory effect whatsoever, especially when you look at other states with similar laws like Georgia, where in fact the African American vote has gone up in midterms since their voter ID law was established in 2006.
Well, speaking of Georgia, we can bring in Texas as well, since Joe Listingi is a proud Georgia Democrat, helping clients across the country. What about photo ID in general, Joe? Is it in fact burdensome?
Yeah, it is. Just to be completely honest, it takes time away from someone who has to go to work. The DMV is not open from 6 at night until 10 at night, and it costs money. So this is nothing more than a poll tax. And this is all sort of a mute point in the end, because none of these are going to pass the constitutional challenge. Voting is a primary right that deserves an undue burden, and forcing someone to go get an identification card with a photo ID that costs them money is going to fail that test, and the court will do that. I mean, this is probably, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many general counsel that I talk to, pretty much going to be an open and shut case in the end.
Well, apparently not in the opinion of a prominent Georgia Democrat who is the former president of the United States, one James Earl Jimmy Carter, part of a bipartisan commission. Former Secretary of State Jim Baker for the Republicans, former President Carter for the Democrats, recommended voter ID, including ostensibly photos. So you're disagreeing with President Carter? You really believe it's an undue burden?
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Carter Foundation actually works internationally, and in most foreign countries that are democracies, you don't need, not only do you not need voter identification, but you don't need to register. Once you are 18 and a citizen, you are automatically registered. So my props, I was just in North Dakota that has this law, and I have to say that this is great up there, that anyone can vote who can prove residency in the state through some sort of bill or citizenship through a Social Security card, a free document, by the way, provided by the government.
Yeah, but we also know cases of, quote, same-day voting. Sarah, I remember back in '06 when the Democrats were able to pick up a Senate seat in Montana, proffering beer busts for college students at the University of Montana and Montana State to go down and vote for the Democrat against Conrad Burns. Is same-day voting and students becoming Montanans for purposes of casting a ballot, that's not exactly fair maintenance of the franchise, is it?
Well, this is what I mean when I say that voting is a fundamental right, but also to have your vote count is a fundamental right. We've seen a report from the Milwaukee Police Department a couple years ago that showed extensive voter fraud in that state. So we know that this does happen, and it's not fair to those who do show up and vote. I disagree how the court will come out on this. I think that voter ID is going to be upheld, and I think this is a Justice Department who's proven to be very political. They're not going after the IRS. They're not investigating that, but they're going after Texas when they can't even show that anyone hasn't been able to vote yet.
Sarah, I'm sorry, Wendy Davis actually had to fill out a provisional ballot because her ID didn't match up. And Jim Wright, the former Speaker of the House, couldn't vote because he's 80 years old and didn't have a driver's license. So there are plenty of cases out there where people have been turned away. So I think those are definitely plaintiffs that are waiting.
Secure her ballot and bring ID to her voting place. So again, still no one who hasn't been able to vote.
Equally, there have been really no cases of fraud on malicious votes. I mean, I appreciate the Milwaukee study. I haven't heard about this, but there was one just put out by NLCS in Colorado that said there was, like, it's 0.0001% or something like that. It's very small. This is a problem that doesn't exist. If I have to pay money to get something to vote, it's a poll tax.
Well, no, wait.
The voter ID is free in Texas. It's free in most of the states that I've heard about.
Do I have to go get it? Do I have to go get my picture taken? Because that's time away from work and that's money.
Well, now wait a minute. When you are taking the standard of poll tax, Joe, let's just hang on a second and take a look at other areas of commerce and other areas where identity is required and some public health requirements have to be met. For example, to go to public school, kids have to go to the doctor, have to be immunized. That's not considered a school tax. When someone shows up to buy something in a store with a check or other, at times even with a debit card or a charge card, and people ask for a photo ID, that's not considered a tax. So why are you playing fast and loose with the definition of poll tax here?
Listen, if you have to pay money to do a fundamental right, this is a primary right in the Constitution. It should be completely unburdened as much as possible. And if you have to pay any money at all to do this, then you are in violation of the Constitution. So, and that includes time, because time is money for families that work. I mean, there are poor families, and let's get to the crux of this, which is where poor families and inner urban families that don't drive all need to take time away from their work day to go get an ID to do what is the basis of our Constitution, the right to vote, something that is free for everybody and should remain that way.
So, Sarah, I guess the remedy in Joe's world is just to provide free photo ID, and there goes the burden.
We do provide free photo ID. That's what I'm confused about. If I have to take
time away from work, that's money out of a pocket, out of a budget, a family budget. I'm sorry.
Well, what about those? What about those who don't work? What about those? They're not disenfranchised. Is time away from lining up for entitlement checks? Is that a poll tax in your mind?
For entitlement checks?
Yeah.
Again, this
or
is
unemployment checks.
Constitution. This is the foundation of our democracy here. Voting is supposed to be free. It's supposed to be clear and easy, and it should be. That's what we should all vote for and strive for.
Supreme Court
voter
has
IDs,
also held that.
Unfortunately,
let's let Sarah have a chance.
If you're a woman who got divorced and changed your name, and your ID does not match your legal name now, you run into problems. These are very real problems.
It's also held that traveling is a fundamental right, but you still have to have a passport to leave the country. So this idea that something that's a fundamental right can't have any burden whatsoever is unrealistic and not what the law holds.
Every country requires a passport, though. I mean, that's you're leaving our country to go to another country. The passport isn't for exiting the U.S. It's for entering the other country.
You're the one who just said that it's a fundamental right. I'm saying you're making up constitutional law as you go, and I just want to stick to what the Supreme Court's actually said.
I didn't say travel was a fundamental.
Before we mislead people about where this is actually headed.
And in terms of...
The Constitution doesn't address international travel.
Well,
the Supreme Court has held that it does.
The Constitution is a document of limited and enumerated powers, not an elastic document to be stretched and turned into silly putty and then mounted, and where you see the reverse as if it's a comic strip. So when we're dealing with something as precious as the franchise, Joe, what's wrong with people being able to prove they are who they claim to be?
Well, first off, I live in Virginia, where I have to stand when I go to the polling location in front of the line of 100 people and loudly announce my name and my address. By the way, my precinct has over 2,000 voters in it, in case someone behind me doesn't think who I am who I say I am. That is embarrassing and demeaning. And this is just another way to add another layer on top of voting. For the history of this country, we have not required this. But all of a sudden today we do. And there is still no evidence that real voter fraud exists. This is a made-up problem, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, but the Republicans are using it to disenfranchise.
There it is. Last word, 30 seconds, Sarah, very quickly.
So he's saying that we can't have voter ID. You also can't say your name at the polling place, which is not new in any place whatsoever. That's been on the books for 50 years in most places. This is a Department of Justice who has made this a political fight because they think they can increase their base voters. In Georgia, we've actually seen minority votes increase since voter ID has gone up. And at the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure that everyone gets to vote and that everyone's vote counts.
When demand is